Okay. Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever in the world you may be. Welcome to session one of youth advocacy training for the Ocean and Climate Action. We are going to get started in just a minute here with session one, the Ocean Climate Connection, with our wonderful speaker, Khadijah Stewart. But first, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know how old you are, where you're from. And our icebreaker question for today is, if you could become any marine species, what would you be and why? We'll give it just a second here before we get started. And yeah, welcome. Khadijah loves jellyfish. Jellyfish are awesome too. I think if I were a marine species, I would probably be a manta ray. I just find them to be really, really gorgeous, and they have the biggest brain, I think, ratio of any marine species to their body weight, which is really awesome. We have Kavya, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, 14 from Illinois, and she would be a sea otter. We have Maddie from Indiana, also a jellyfish. Caroline from Virginia would be a pufferfish. I love the biodiversity happening here. We got sea turtles, orcas, dolphins. Yeah, awesome. Basking shark, that's a good one. Love basking sharks. Penguins, turtles. Excellent. Oh, we have some friends from Morocco and Texas. Awesome. It's good to see everybody here. I hope you're all excited for the program. I think we may have a couple of repeat program attendees, which is awesome. So if you have joined us before, welcome back. And if this is your first time for youth advocacy training, I'm just going to run through a little bit of the program today. So this is our agenda. Going through the program, going to talk with Khadijah, introduce her. We'll have a little bit of a discussion. Khadijah's also prepared some slides to help explain some of the science stuff behind the ocean climate connection today, which is really exciting. And then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end with just a couple of announcements at the very, very end. For the Q&A, if you do have questions at any point, feel free to share in the chat or go ahead and use that Q&A feature on Zoom. And we will hope to get to as many questions as possible. But no guarantees we can hit them all, especially if you guys have really good questions, which I hope you do. So yeah, just to get started, welcome. Advocacy training is typically a 4-week long free virtual program for youth all around the world, designed to really enhance your advocacy and leadership skills. We want to really make sure we're building up the next generation of leaders for the ocean and climate. There's a lot of different opportunities you guys will have throughout this program to talk with experts, network and collaborate with your peers, and hopefully develop a strong foundation for all of the things that you hope to do in the future to help make the world a better place. We're really excited because since its inception in 2022, we've reached almost 2,500 young people from over 120 countries. And it's really, really exciting because this content in this program was developed in collaboration with not only experts in the field of ocean and climate advocacy, but also the World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council, which is a really special program that I also get to be a part of as the youth programs manager for the Ocean Project. Now, one of the things that we like to talk about before we get into the discussion for session one is, what is the Ocean Climate Connection? Why are we talking about it today? So in 2024, we launched the Ocean Project, and World Ocean Day launched a new multi-year action theme, which is catalyzing action for the ocean and climate. Every single year, we have a specific action theme that we kind of try to engage with people on throughout the year on World Ocean Day and beyond. And with the ocean and climate connection being a really big part of that, we're trying to kind of attack it from all different angles. So every single month has a different issue or theme under the umbrella of the Ocean Climate Connection. So for February this year, we are focused on taking action for the high seas. If you're interested in learning more about the high seas and the High Seas Treaty, go ahead to worldoceanday.org and check out all of the resources that we have about that, and see how you can take action to protect the high seas of our planet. Now, just to introduce myself, if you're not familiar, my name is Laura Johnson. I am the Youth Programs Manager for the Ocean Project. I've worked with the Ocean Project for about 4 years. I've been in and out of advocacy, marine science research, different branches all under those umbrellas, and I currently live in Los Angeles. But now to introduce our speaker, we have Khadijah Stewart. She's the founder and director of Eco Vibes Environmental Creatives. She's from Trinidad, and she does really, really wonderful work in the Caribbean doing political and youth advocacy on the environment, making sure that the Caribbean youth voices are uplifted, and is just really, really inspiring. And I'm so excited to hear from her today. So I will pass it over to Khadijah if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure, let me just share my screen and open up my presentation because I am.
Oh, Khadijah, I think you just muted yourself.
You could no longer hear me.
I think when you were sharing your screen, yeah, I don't know if we could hear you.
That's
Uh-oh.
wild.
That was not happening before.
Okay.
Let's try one more time.
Yeah, okay. All right. Very
Worst comes to
interesting.
worst, you can email me your presentation and we can go back.
Okay,
I
so
can still hear you.
all right. Well, I can't play the video anymore. So
Okay, okay.
yeah, it's okay. It's okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Khadijah Stewart. I am from Trinidad and Tobago, like Laura mentioned, an island girl, and definitely here and very excited to talk about the Ocean Climate Nexus and bridging the gap. And I have my organization, Eco Vibes Environmental Creators, and that's all about climate storytelling and the Ocean Climate Nexus, as well as our ocean conservation arm, EcoSeas Caribbean. And ah, I'm so sad about the video because it explained everything so well, but that's okay.
You got
Um,
this. You got this.
yeah, so a lot of times, when you hear the ocean climate nexus and you're like, okay, but what exactly is that? And it's just really explaining the role that the ocean plays in regulating our climate and our weather patterns. And then how, the impacts of climate change is affecting the ocean. So it's just this big connected, let's go with story of how these two ecosystems work hand in hand. And usually sometimes when people are presenting on ocean conservation in general, they'll be like, take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out, next one. And they'll be like, the second breath comes from the ocean. And the reason they say that is because 50% of the oxygen we breathe does come from the ocean. And I mentioned before, the ocean is very important in absorbing and regulating our climate, but it absorbs heat and carbon dioxide, which is crucial. But as we know right now, there's more and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the ocean is basically working overtime, trying to absorb as much as it can. And that in itself is having severe impacts, not just on ocean ecosystems, but on land as well. And with how the ocean currents operate, I mentioned this influences weather patterns. And again, I'm not sad about it. I'll get over it by the third slide, but I really wish that you could have seen how the ocean currents work. Maybe at the end of the presentation, I could share and then you could see the video so that I don't have to speak. And with the ocean absorbing all the excess heat and carbon dioxide, this is causing ocean acidification, and we're getting things like coral bleaching, or unfortunately, some of the marine species, they're calcium rich, and then when you're absorbing more CO2, you're getting like erosion of shells and everything else happening. But yeah, and then changes in sea surface temperature. These things, it impacts fisheries, food security, everything else. It's literally just showing how the ocean is important in regulating our climate and in making sure that we have a climate that we could survive on, but at the same time, how with increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, how that is then impacting the ocean. And then we ending up in a doom cycle, right? And we have so many different threats to the ocean right now. Things like I mentioned, climate change. We have overfishing and unsustainable fishing practices. And when I say overfishing, so here in the Caribbean, for example, usually, when you say overfishing, you're not speaking about like your local fishing communities that go out and do this on your livelihood every day. We're speaking about those large trawl ships that catching millions of fish each day. That is an insane practice, and it is very unsustainable. It is not regulated, and they're out there 24/7 just constantly depleting fish stocks, or even catching young fish and not giving it the opportunity to reach to its mature stage. So again, depleting the fish stocks. Things like pollution. This picture was taken, what year are we in? 2025. In 2023, in Guatemala. I was part of a program with the Peace Boat, and we were in Guatemala doing research and engaging with the local communities. And here you could see several different things happening. There's pollution, there's unregulated coastal development, and there is also coastal erosion taking place. So these are some of the threats, from human activities. There's a new industry on the horizon called deep sea mining, and that's basically going to depths below 200 meters to get minerals, things like cobalt, nickel, zinc, to quote unquote drive the green revolution. But this is something that we definitely don't need to do. But this is an example of that ocean climate nexus. So they're saying that we need these minerals to drive renewable energy technologies, things like the batteries in your phone and everything else. And we're just like, no, we don't need to go to the ocean for that. We already have things on land. And then seeing then if we go to the ocean for it, how that will have negative impacts. And we're also seeing things like loss of marine biodiversity with coral bleaching, but not just coral bleaching, with when there's pollution taking place and there's so many creatures that end up dying because the water becomes intoxicated or the water no longer has oxygen, and all these other different things, impacting the ocean. And then illegal and unregulated activities. So not just from your fishing sector, but tourism, for example, is a big thing. And you have people putting up hotels on the coast and doing all these different things where they're not getting permission to do it. But, you know, people love the beach, the sand, the sea, and everything else. So they would go to it regardless. And with that, with all those different threats, the ocean is showing us exactly what we are doing and how it is being impacted. And these pictures are all pictures from the Caribbean. Last year, in Trinidad and Tobago, we had not just Trinidad and Tobago, but the entire region, a massive coral bleaching phenomenon taking place. And the picture at the bottom left, all right, left. Yes, that is the largest brain coral in the Western Hemisphere. And as you can see, it is currently being severely bleached. This is in Tobago. Now, there is possibility of recovery, but what happens is that it comes like when unfortunately, let's use COVID as the example, right? So during that time when people were getting COVID, like, yes, you were recovering, but your immune system afterwards became very weak. And, some people are so susceptible to like getting the flu or getting, all these different things more easily because of the damage that COVID did to their bodies. And this is what is happening with coral bleaching when some of the reefs are able to recover. Now they're just kind of basically sickly, and then they end up getting different diseases. The picture in the middle is the after effects of Hurricane Beryl. And now Hurricane Beryl was one of the strongest hurricanes in the region. And it was the first time the Caribbean experienced a category 4 hurricane at the end of June. And then it turned into a category 5 hurricane in July. This was the first time something like that has ever happened. And here we see how this affects the livelihoods of people who depend on the ocean, because this is all the fisher folk, their boats were destroyed, they were trying to salvage it, and then several piers were destroyed. And it's just like, overwhelming, but we're not going to keep this conversation in this doom state. I promise it would get positive. And then things like coastal erosion, with increased wave energy. And the reason, let me backtrack a little bit. The reason we have like increased hurricanes and increased storm surges or more intense waves is because of those warming waters, and it creates ideal conditions for things like tropical storms that then develop into hurricanes. So the warmer the water is, the more likely that will happen and the more intense they will be, which is exactly what we're experiencing in the region. And things like coastal erosion as well. So not all the time it might turn into a hurricane, but as a tropical storm, the wave energy is so strong and so powerful that we're seeing intense and increased rates of coastal erosion, wearing away the roads. I don't know if you could tell, but some of those houses look like they're hanging on maybe by the next 2 to 3 years, and they might be taken by the sea. And this is a very real reality of, the impacts of climate change and what several people are experiencing in island nations, and not even just island nations, but across the world in general. And so the question becomes, how do we connect the dots, right, with this ocean and climate advocacy work that we have going on? So there's a lot of work on ocean governance and climate change happening separately. And nothing that drives me very like that drives me very mad, because it's just like, why are we not working together when we're having several of these different conversations? Like, we know and understand how important the ocean climate nexus is, but there's so many different conversations happening with ocean conservation and climate change in general. And for example, climate change, just recently there was the conference of the parties, which is called COP 2029. So this is where all the countries who's agreed to take action on climate change, on climate change, yes, with the UN, come together and meet and set goals and set targets and everything else. And there's bare minimum ocean language mentioned at those conferences, and bare people pushing for increase ocean language so that we could really see and work with this nexus and understand how we could develop more coherent and cohesive policy tools. Because at the end of the day, we could go forward and we could replant corals and we could do all these different things, right? But if the laws aren't there to help govern the work that grassroots or people doing on the ground, then a lot of the work would be discarded. So it's so important that with ocean governance and all these other governance structures, that we really try our best to integrate the two. When you look at the blue economy is a very recent term, and that basically just means like all the businesses or economic resources that comes out from the ocean. So things like the shipping industry, things like fishing, things like tourism, things like people who own dive shops, like even renewable energy, like offshore wind energy, all those different things that are as a result of like a job being created by the ocean. And sometimes when you look at these things, they're either solely focused on ocean and not focused on climate and human activities as well. But it's like, no, we need to really work together so that, yes, you could have economic growth, you could have, all these industries thriving as well, but understand that climate change and the impacts are very real. And if you're not addressing it, then these businesses that you want to continue driving forward would unfortunately be negatively impacted. Example of this is like how you saw the coral reefs being bleached, right? So if it is you as a tourist, let's say visiting an island in the Pacific, let's use an island in Pacific, Fiji, and you want to go, oh my God, I want to see all the beautiful coral reefs. I want to see all these things. You go to the dive shop. The dive shop charges you X amount of money. You're excited to go out, and then you go and dive, and all you see is a sea of white, just bleach reefs and everything else. And then afterwards, you go back and you're just like, don't ever go there again. So they end up losing business. So it's also in their best interest to help protect the marine environment and understand how things work and the impacts of climate change and how they too could be part of the solution. And then what's my next point? Science and traditional knowledge. So yeah, a lot of times where we look at the not just the impacts of climate change, but also the ocean, there's a group of people, or there tends to be several people left out of the conversation. Indigenous people, youth. So it's about how do we make sure and incorporate all the different mindsets, all the different knowledge holders, all the different stakeholders, and bring everybody to the table so that everybody understands the problem and everybody could contribute to the development of the solution. Now, Laura, I don't know if you want to jump in with any discussion questions at this point or if I should keep going.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to jump to the discussion questions. I think you covered a lot. That was a great overview of the ocean climate nexus. And I hope that, some of our younger viewers who are just getting into the marine conservation world and learning about these things for the first time can kind of take this and run with it moving forward. So, I'm going to share the presentation I have here. Now we've kind of already talked a lot about how things are connected, but as you mentioned, it's something that drives you crazy. Similarly, it drives me crazy that the climate advocacy space and the ocean advocacy space are very separate. Um,
Mhm.
as you've discussed, there is really no reason for them to be. So, can we talk a little bit about any of the creative media, grassroots activism that you've seen kind of bridge these movements? And if you have any good examples, if you could share some of those successful collaborations that either you've been a part of or have helped organize or have seen that have done a really good job of integrating ocean and climate advocacy together to create that action that we need.
Yes. Okay. So, if it's okay with you, because I have some pictures in action, I will go back to the presentation again. And all right. No, we need to open it up big and nice. Yes. Okay. Not that. Here we go. So, have I seen remind me of the question?
Any of the creative media and grassroots activism that has effectively bridged these movements, and then any examples of successful collaborations of those things.
Okay, yes. So creative meat. So one of the things that we tend to do here with EcoSeas Caribbean is because sometimes the language for ocean conservation or climate change could be very technical, it could be very jargon heavy. And well, if this is your first time jumping into a ocean related presentation, it might have felt that way coming across to you. And one of the easiest things we found to do is to use things like art, music, cultural tools to really connect people to it. So we've had several art exhibitions, or sip and paints, or just where we would design banners and let people come together and paint it and have discussions on the ocean and climate nexus. And that has been like one of the most fun, enjoyable things because now afterwards they want to keep learning more, they want to keep seeing pictures. We've done, things like cleanups, for example. It's very easy for you to go to a beach and see pollution on the shore. And the reason I use sometimes when you hear pollution, you're not really thinking that it is connected to the ocean climate nexus. But a lot of the times, what is polluting the beaches are plastics, and plastic is a direct byproduct of the fossil fuel industry, right? So which is where climate change and the climate nexus comes in. And a lot of times it's very easy to see this on the shore and be like, yes, we're going to clean up. But there's a lot of plastics that exist under the water as well. And so we've been doing several like underwater cleanups and going and taking pictures and videos and creating a catalog so that people able to connect the dots. Because unfortunately, sometimes with the ocean, it could be something that is out of sight, out of mind, right? Or something that is far removed, or something that you're just not engaging with on an everyday basis. So you aren't 100% aware of what is happening. So for us, it was very important to start documenting these things visually so that we could, bring it to the forefront of the conversation. and also getting people involved in restoring some of the coral reefs, doing research. Now, that is a little more technical, and you need to be trained and everything in doing that, but it is not something that is not doable. It is doable. And there's several different organizations working on, the ocean climate nexus, especially not just within the US but worldwide. I know Earth Echo International, they have a huge presence in the US, seeing as we have a large US audience. The Sustainable Ocean Alliance, they have a young youth network, Youth Ocean Alliance, Generation Ocean, or there's several universities with clubs and everything else. And this might be your opportunity as well to be like, hey, you're doing work on maybe just climate change, or you're doing work on just ocean. Like, why don't we bridge the gap, and like, why don't we try and work on both? Because if you're working on one, then you're technically working on the other as well, right? So why not just make it a point of focus as well? But yeah, I think this using art, music, we've had, some festivals and everything else, yoga on the beach, to really use those different things to connect people to the ocean climate nexus. And it's been working, because now people are more curious. We have a lot of questions, people, activities. There was this one time we went, Trinidad is very famous for leatherback turtles, and the turtles will come up on shore. And interestingly enough, again, people were thinking that, it's just sea turtles, they're just coming up on shore. Climate change is not going to affect these sea turtles. But what we're seeing is that because the temperature is rising, that now we're only getting female turtles, because the temperature of the sand affects the sex of the turtles. So now we're only putting out female turtles. So it's like, where are the males? Where are the men? Like, what's happening here? And we take people out, hands-on activities to tag the turtles, to track the turtles, to really understand what is happening. And sometimes these immersive experiences really help connect you to the information and to the topic in a much deeper way than just reading about it, for example, or watching documentaries. That works for me. That's why I had like about 6 videos in this presentation because I love documentaries and everything else. But yeah.
Definitely, Khadija. Thank you so much for sharing all of these. For documentaries too, I just want to shout out an organization called the Water Bear Network, waterbear.org, I believe, or you can just Google the Water Bear Network. They have a ton of free documentaries available online, which is really awesome, and I love all of the stuff that they post up. But yeah, Khadija, there are so many different ways to get involved in the ocean and climate nexus in a variety of ways. And I see this next slide here. I do want to go to my next question,
Mm-hmm.
which goes back to some of the things that you were talking about in your overview of ocean and climate connection, which is the intersectionality and justice aspect of things, especially as somebody who is working in the Caribbean with other island nations, and that is your personal experience that you are bringing to the forefront of your advocacy and encouraging young people to do the same. So for everybody else watching, I saw we have some students from Illinois. We have some students from other landlocked areas who are not necessarily in coastal regions. How are we actually able to, engage in those non-coastal regions while still ensuring the ocean makes its way into these conversations, while also understanding that it is the communities who are at the front lines who actually need to be the ones who have the loudest voices here?
Yeah. So I think for one of the biggest things, and it's so silly, because which is why the operation in silos annoys me, but I was once that person, right? So I studied climate change for my master's, and I was just strictly climate change lens. Like, I couldn't see anything beyond that. And it was only until I came into contact with a next organization that encouraged me to apply for a summit. And I was like, but I don't know anything about the ocean. And they were like, what are you talking about? Of course you do. You studied climate change. And at that time, I was like climate change and water resources, which is things like your rivers and everything else. And for the life of me, I could not connect the dots until one day I was doing a cleanup at like a famous waterfall and everything else. And I looked at all the trash that was there and I was like, wow, eventually all of this would have ended up in the ocean. And it was in that moment, I was just like, every single thing that we do on land affects the ocean. So you might not be right next to it every day 24/7, or even like myself, I am on an island, but I don't go to the ocean, and I am not I don't live in a coastal community area, but that does not mean that my activities does not have an impact on the ocean. So something as simple as polluting your river, all rivers drain into the sea, it's going to have an impact. Or, your electricity usage and everything else, people releasing carbon dioxide on land, that's going to have an impact on the ocean. So it's very important sometimes for us to step away from that silos mindset and realize that every single thing on land, including us, is connected. And in doing that, then you start to see these connections in everyday life and how you operate. And a lot of times, like, it is very key for the communities at the front line to have the loudest voice, like you mentioned. But I think everyone's voice definitely needs to be included and definitely needs to be heard. One of the unfortunate things that I have had to experience, I am at the end of the day a young black woman from the Caribbean, right? So it's just like, yes, inclusivity, but again, it's just like there's no one like me there, and my reality as a Caribbean person is very different from somebody who's from New York or somebody who is from, I don't know, Alaska, as opposed to somebody who's from Spain. We all have different realities, but at the same time, the ocean is this one very big connected body. So if it is we're only putting out solutions that benefit, let's say, Europe, then we're definitely not solving the problem, because then that's just like one small space. And the impacts of climate change, the impacts of ocean degradation, all the marine species that live in the ocean, they don't know boundaries like how we as humans know boundaries. So I would say a turtle in Trinidad as opposed to a turtle in LA. Like, it does not have an appreciation for the fact that, okay, I need my passport now. I'm landing in the US. It needs to be stamped. It's like, no, it's just swimming freely and it's living its best life. Right. So all these man-made boundaries and borders that does not really exist with the ocean ecosystem. So it's so important that every single voice and every person comes to the table and is able to provide, this is the reality of what is happening by me, and this is the solutions, or this is what I am not hearing about, and this is what I would like to learn about. I am from a landlocked country. Explain the connection a little deeper to me, or how what exactly it is I am doing here on land. So let's say you live in an area where there's mass deforestation taking place. Guess what? That's going to have serious impacts on the ocean, right? But if it is you not present and maybe closer to the coast, you're seeing these impacts, and the people at the coast don't know what is happening and why, because they are doing everything to their best ability to protect and preserve the ocean. But then further inland, there's all this destruction and devastation taking place. But if the people who present near that destruction not at the table, then guess what? You're never going to be able to solve the problem, right? Which is why, again, it's important for everybody to be present, everybody voices to be heard, and to really understand sometimes that we also exist in our bubbles, and sometimes that bubble could be privileged or not, but we all have our bubbles that we exist in, and it's important to make sure that when you're coming to a table with several different voices, that you're able to step outside of it and be able to actively listen to what is being said, and then actively work towards, coming up with the solution. And this is all again in line with environmental justice and making sure that justice in general, justice, equity, equality, making sure everybody, benefits from the solutions that are being put forward, and not just a select few.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be something as intense and widespread as environmental racism that we're talking about, but it can also, a disability issue when it comes to talking about plastic straws. There are some people who have physical disabilities that make it so that they need plastic straws, which is its own very complicated issue in and of itself, but it's worth having a conversation about and listening to the people on both sides of that conversation and understanding where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Um, do you have other slides about this one? I don't remember seeing in your presentation or not.
No.
No, okay. So we'll move to the next slide here about global youth involvement. We've again talked about all of these, crazy, kind of scary things that are happening to the planet. We've talked about all of the different ways that we can kind of, approach these conversations and make sure we're having the right conversations and the right people are at the table for those discussions. And, when it comes to youth specifically, there can be a lot of kind of obstacles in the way of actually getting to those conversations. So
Yeah.
how do we tackle that? How can young people actually navigate these very complex political systems and actually reach those higher level decision making kind of conversations that we're talking about here?
Yeah, so that is a very excellent question, and I have all of this listed here, and I'm tempted to just be like, yeah, don't tell the truth, just say what's on the slides. But the reality is, and I am now 32 years old, and youth stops at 35, so I'm still a youth, okay? But
I'm 27. I still feel like I'm a young person. So it's okay.
yeah, but there's so many different barriers that young people face. Things like access to information, that is a big one. Access to funding, access to just even being present in the room, being respected, being seen as a valuable stakeholder. Like all these different barriers come up, or even getting an audience with, your local representative or government or something like that is an insane amount of work. And I have no idea how I am still standing after going through some of the things I have been through, trying to get into certain spaces and do different things. But I think one of the biggest things that, I mean, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work and a lot of mental strength and everything else. But there was a time I was just like, well, if nobody wants to give me a seat at the table, then I'll just build my own table. And that's literally what I started doing. I had no tools. I taught myself how to do a lot of different things. And I was just like day by day, I would learn, I would read, I would, put my head down, decide that this is something that I would like to do. For a lot of different people, their stories and their journey in ocean advocacy and governance work is very different. So in some countries, there are programs at the governmental level where you're able to go in, you're able to get training, and then you're able to go to some of these important conferences. In other places, there are several youth-based organizations. So like I gave the example of Earth Echo for example, and there's also like Youngo, which is the official like youth arm working on climate change, and they have different categories underneath there, one of them being ocean conservation. But they have access to certain spaces, and these are high level spaces. And with that, you get to contribute, your voice, your solutions. They present policy papers, they present all these different things. There's training programs. There's so many training programs out now. Like this is one of them, right? This is one of the many training programs where you're able to get knowledge, to understand some of these systems a little bit better so that you can then take that next step forward. There's opportunities provided by UNESCO, grants where you're able to get funding to do beach cleanups to start with, and then you could take these things up. There's training programs that could guide you on how to develop a project, how to become a leader, how to start like a campaign, how to use social media for your advantage. Because sometimes, and this is something that I want everybody here to take away more than anything else that I have said. All the technical things, yes, but we all have a part and a role to play, and sometimes it's very easy to think that like you want to do everything, but it's about staying true to like what feels right and great for you, and being genuine to yourself and understanding your superpower and how best you could bring that forward. So for a lot of people, they'll be like, yes, I want to get, the government to pass this policy and everything else, but you're an artist, right? And you could tap into that art, tap into bringing people together, tap into, creating this big creative space that could then get, all the information out there in a way that's digestible and fun. And then somebody who is very strong in politics and everything else, they could take up the mantle, and then they too could go in and they could push from that level. But it's about understanding that everybody has their role to play, and making sure that you're tapping into the role that feels best and right for you. And it does have an impact, and it will have an impact. It might not be the overarching big impact that you're hoping for. So when I started, I was just like, I want to go and work in the UN, and I want to do all these great things. But then I just started writing blogs. And then I realized, because I was writing blogs, people were being more informed. And because they were more informed, they were then making more conscious decisions. They were asking more questions. They were, challenging things a little bit more. And I was like, wait a minute, I am driving change in a different way than what it is I anticipated. But it is change nonetheless, and it is having an impact. So yeah, there's several different avenues to go through to, getting into these high level spaces, but not all the time. The high level spaces is where you will want to be at. It could be nerve wracking at times. It could be, anxiety filled and everything else. Or it could just not be an inviting space. And you might prefer to be on the ground. You might prefer to be in the field, replanting mangroves, diving, working with the coral reefs, and let somebody else go to these high level places and present. So, but it takes time to find where your soft spot is in this big maze, but it's there. And then when you find it, just tap into it and make sure that you use that to the best of your ability. Because again, your job might be to help somebody. You might be crawling so that you can help somebody else walk, and then the person that walk will be able to help somebody else run. But in the end, it will have an impact.
Yes. Yeah, that is such a beautiful sentiment, Khadijah. I just shared a link in the chat. I really recommend checking out the Venn diagram by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. Khadijah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work or not, but she is a personal hero of mine, and she kind of took this concept from a Japanese idea called ikigai, I believe. And
Mhm.
it's how to find your purpose. And it's a Venn diagram, like the overlapping circles, what needs to be done, what are you good at, and what brings you joy. And it's finding that middle bit of those three overlapping circles, like you said, can be difficult. It is a lot of trial and error to get there, but to your point, it is um something worth looking into. And like you said as well, like everybody has their own individual role to play. In the last slide, talking about if somebody is living in a landlocked area, they're dealing with deforestation in their community. Even if ocean stuff is their main driver behind all of this, they can still get involved in a deforestation or anti-deforestation action
Mhm.
campaign, because it's all connected. um so yeah, I think that from there, I would love to move to the Q&A, because we do have about 15 minutes, and we already have a really good question in the Q&A here. We have from Zach. I live near a freshwater lake rather than the ocean. Can freshwater youth projects be a good start to ocean advocacy? I think that's a wonderful question to start off with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where I started. I was basically doing cleanups at rivers and waterfalls inland. I was not looking at the ocean one bit. To me, the ocean was just where I was going to have a good time, where I was going to relax, spend, time with my friends and family, and I was not thinking about anything else. But like every single water body ends up in the ocean at some point in time. So if it is, you're near freshwater and you're seeing things like plastic pollution and everything else, it's going to end up in the ocean. So you could start with, helping keeping that area clean. Or if there's like mass deforestation taking place along the banks of the river as well, then that's going to cause more siltation. So like your soil and everything, entering the river, the freshwater body system, again, having an impact because it does not belong there. It does not belong there, right? And yeah, so I think that that's a great place to start. And then if you want afterwards, you could branch out, or you could simply just continue working on making sure that that freshwater ecosystem is healthy. Because if one ecosystem is healthy, then all of them will be healthy because they're all literally connected. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody in the chat, Haley, has a question. What is the coolest project or service that you've done? That's a good question.
Ooh, coolest project.
I know for me that's even a hard answer to or hard question to answer because there's so many like what does that even mean? Like the coolest one. There's so many reasons that
Yeah,
be cool.
I, it's like it might be cool to me, but I feel like if I describe it, it's gonna sound so lame.
Let's hear it.
But I have two. So the first one was there was a lot of work I was doing on the issue of deep sea mining. I kind of mentioned that in the beginning. And I had this big youth summit. It was in Jamaica, and I brought 25 young people from the Caribbean and Latin America to Jamaica. It was so much vibe, so much fun. Everybody was learning whole day about, the issues of deep sea mining and everything else. And then on the opening night, we had this massive art exhibition. We had people from the Pacific. They chanted, they sang in their language. We had local people play drums, do all these incredible things. But it was just really a moment to celebrate the ocean. And then after that, everybody went to one of the nature parks, and we did, not the same day, the day after, there was scuba diving, there was paddle boarding. It was just like, so we took the learning from the classroom basically, and then went out into the ocean physically and just had a day of fun and everything else. Because sometimes when you're doing this work, it could be overwhelming, could be saddening. I mean, you saw the pictures of the coral bleaching, right? So it's always important to make sure that we have fun and remember, like, we are all just here. We are all human at the end of the day, and there's so much that we can do. And it's important to have community and to just have everybody singing and dancing and having a good time whilst, working towards ocean conservation. That was fun. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
so it doesn't really sound that cool, but I hope it is. I could drop a link so that you could see, because there's an e-magazine about it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
you should drop the link. I think that's awesome. And honestly, it is really cool because it's a community thing. Like you bring people together and you're just there out of celebration. It's this common cause. It's a beautiful thing. I see a couple of questions that are kind of similar. We have Kellen from Connecticut asking if there's anything that they could do in their community to help the water quality in their city. Danielle asked, I live in a landlocked city in the Midwest. How do I get people in my community to care about what's happening in the ocean? And then Kopal said, what passion projects do you recommend starting in an area with no water bodies but does have an interest in marine biology? And I think all of those questions, while they are kind of asking about, more specific regions or areas of focus, um, I feel like there is a way to kind of blanket answer all of these. And I think, I'll start it off, Khadijah, if you don't mind, because I think the first step is finding out where to learn more, which is exactly what you are doing by participating in this training right now, which is awesome. For me, as the organizer of this program, it feels really good to have you all here and interested in and asking questions like that. But really it is, I think that's the first step is finding out more about these issues, how all of the issues are connected, and then figuring out, looking up organizations in your area that are focused on as close to that issue as you possibly can get. I know for landlocked areas, finding ocean stuff is very difficult in that sense. But if you don't find anything, you can start it yourself. And that's also part of what this program is trying to support you to do. I'll get to the announcements and stuff in a moment. At the end, we'll talk about the next couple of sessions and what we go over there. But it's all about, figuring out how to use social media and communications, how to use event planning, fundraising, and then campaign organizing, and how to take those skills. And if you don't see the kind of change you want to see happening in your community, we really want to help support you to be able to do that for yourself. So Khadijah, do you have anything else to add to how do you just sort of get started in the first place?
Well, I think you covered the big overarching thing, right? Which is literally being informed, signing up to things like this, getting that knowledge and everything else. But then taking that to other people, that's where things could get tricky, right? Especially when you have people that just not interested in general. So, and one of the first things that we had tried to do, and I will use the deep sea mining stuff again. So we were just there, we were like deep sea mining, and nobody cared about what it is we were talking about at all. And then we said, oh well, we're having this exhibition, tell me why you love the ocean, just paint and tell us why you love the ocean. And then people started painting and doing that. And then when we had the exhibition, we used that opportunity to then be like, okay, well, this is all the reasons why you love it. Well, then guess what, this is something that's coming up, it's a threat, and we kind of slide it in there to kind of trick them into learning about it, but for people that really, again, in landlocked areas, I think one of the something that is very crucial to do with ocean literacy, and ocean literacy is just like getting that knowledge out there, right? Because the ocean is something, especially in landlocked areas, that is out of sight, out of mind, that you're just not connected to. It's finding different ways to bring the ocean to people instead of trying to take people to the ocean, because that's not possible. And one of the best ways to do that, like I said, is with the documentaries or with pictures. There was this time we had this call for photographers from the region, and we just got several pictures, and we were able to have like this big we took them to schools, and we just like, well, this is what coral reefs look like in the Bahamas, this is what this looks like here. And it's really using those visual elements to connect people to it, and then developing like games and activities around that to get people more engaged and more willing to care. And or something as simple as just hosting movie nights, and having different teams is a good way to start. So if every Friday you have a movie night, and then you start with an ocean film, then the next week you make that one a more climate related film, and then you kind of generalize it. But that's a good way, again, not to really trick people, but you're like, yeah, we're an environmental group, we care about all these different things, we're doing movie screenings, come and see this documentary about the ocean. And then yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I just shared the link to the Water Bear Network that I mentioned earlier for the free documentaries online in the chat. Definitely recommend checking that out. It's a really, really awesome resource. Really wonderful, different like storytelling approaches on there. Very, very cool people involved in that organization. Highly recommend it. We have so many questions in the chat right
I
now,
see that.
and it's hard. I'm like so excited about it, but it's hard to be able to answer all of them. I do see one from Yi Nam Shu. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is it important to stay positive in ocean climate advocacy? How do you keep having energy and passion? That's a great question.
I how do I keep having energy and passion? Lord alone knows. Okay. I think that for a lot of the times, there's a lot of people that said if you're in this field, you have to be like an eternal optimist, right? And that's, again, not the reality of everybody. Like, it's very hard to tap into that mindset all the time. But one of the biggest things that give me hope and that keeps me wanting to keep going or re-energize, because I do get depressed and I do question my why. And there are times when I'm just like, well, I could just move to a different island and live on the beach and forget about everything, or I could become a teacher or an event planner and forget climate change and forget all these different issues. But then I'm just like, I meet incredible people that are constantly working on different things, coming up with projects, whether it be technological or using nature, or you meet a community of other young people and you realize you are not in this space by yourself. There's people from all the other different islands and countries like literally experiencing the same reality, and then you're able to sit down and share, or they might have a project that's working and they're seeing positive results, and then you're able to be like, oh, well, what did you do? How can I take that and bring that home to me? And then be like, this is how I might have to adopt it, but this is how it's working and everything else. But in the middle of all the darkness, you see the little small glimpses of light, and you hold on to them as long and as much as you possibly can. And you might fall into the darkness at times, but it's always important to remember that there are solutions and there are people out there working on it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer to that question because I will be really honest with all of you. I don't think that I've ever met somebody working in the ocean and climate space who hasn't gone through a time of darkness in their work. And the common thread that I see in all of that is that they have a really wonderful community of people that they work with, which is for me, all of you. To be able to come into this space and have these kinds of conversations, like it really just gets me excited because there's so many people who are interested in having these conversations, right? And whatever you need to turn to, whatever community you have, where you're working in this space, you know, we need to remember that you cannot pour from an empty cup. You need to
Mm.
make sure that you're taking care of yourself when you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the state of the world. I know I've definitely been in that mindset, especially recently, given a little bit of the political climate going on in the United States right now. But honestly, all of that to say is when you have your community of people that you work in, you should be able to lean on them when you need to, and they should be able to lean on you when we're going through these hard times. We're all in this together. The concept of think globally, act locally works really well, not just in our advocacy efforts, but also in our mental health, because we have the ability to reach people all over the world through technology, through social media, and these kinds of platforms, right? And if we know that there are people who are taking care of stuff while we need to take like a week off or sometimes even a month off, we know that that work is still going to be there when we come back because everybody else is also participating. And that's how I stay hopeful, at least. It's hard to remember sometimes, but it's always there. It's like you don't always see the stars during the day, but you know that they're always there at night. And that's kind of cheesy, but whatever.
No, I like it. Like I'm writing that down. I'm gonna use that in a presentation
Oh,
next
don't
time.
quote me on that. That's some saying from somebody else somewhere else. But yeah, I there are so many more excellent questions in here. And if you do have specific questions to ask that we weren't able to get to today, please feel free to reach out to me via email. I'll drop that in the chat in just a second. But I do want to make sure we hit our announcements, our program schedule here, because we are at the top of the hour. I hope to see you all back here next week for session 2 for social media and communications. Like I said, all of the upcoming program sessions are how to take these technical skills, these practical skills, how to run a social media campaign, how to create an event from start to finish, and how to get fundraising for it, and then how to have a campaign be executed on a big scale as a young person. Um, we're really excited about this program. We also have a special session 5. Typically, advocacy training is only 4 weeks. This is a 5-week session. You do have to register separately for session 5. And session 5 is specifically designed for youth who are associated with a zoo, aquarium, or museum. If you are a volunteer, if you are a youth leader, if you've participated in a camp or something along those lines, whatever, if you have been involved as a young person in any sort of programming through a zoo, aquarium, or museum, we're welcome. Uh, we're happy to have you, but you're also welcome to join us for that session if you are not. It's just that that session specifically is going to be talking about how we take these skills and apply them within those types of facilities and institutions. So yeah, so this is our program schedule. Again, I hope to see you all for the next couple of weeks. It's a great part of my week. I know that for sure. And then here is my email address if you are interested in sending any more questions. And then, of course, if you are unable to attend any of the upcoming sessions live for whatever reason, no worries at all. All of the recordings will be up on the World Ocean Day YouTube channel. And then we will also, at the end of the program, have a survey that we will send out to all of you, which helps us continuously improve the program for future training cycles. So, Khadija, thank you so much for joining us. It was a really wonderful conversation. And do you have any final thoughts to share?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying my best to type at like 90, 90 miles a minute to answer some of the questions in the chat, but this was such a lovely opportunity to be here to share. So thank you, Laura, for inviting me. And if anybody wants to connect, I'm always responding to questions and, providing advice and everything else on Instagram or anywhere else. So I put it in the chat, but just in case, it is Eco Vibes, ECOVYBZ, or EcoSeas Caribbean. You can reach out, send me an email, send me a message. I'll get back to you. And yeah.
Awesome, Khadija. Thank you so much. Really lovely to meet you, talk with you, and really inspiring conversation today. For all of you, again, hope to see you next week and for the next couple of weeks. And yeah, have a great rest of your weekend, everybody. We'll see you online soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.